In this video, I'm going to review the Samsung MU7000 4K TV, which is also marketed as the MU8000 in the USA. Hello everyone, my name is Vincent Teo. I'm a TV reviewer and professional calibrator, and this is the Samsung MU7000 as it is known in the UK and Europe. In the USA or North America, it is actually known as the MU8000. But to make sure that we are talking about the same television, just pay attention to the stand, which are like 2 feet at both ends of the display. So this is the MU7000. The MU series is actually the company's step-down range from the top-tier QLED series. So Samsung has, as usual, many television models this year, and the top tier are designated QLED, which uses quantum dot technology. The step down range from that in terms of the 4K television is the MU series. M is the designation for 2017 models, and U stands for UHD or ultra high definition. So this television is the 55-inch version. The model number in the UK is the UE55MU7000. It has a native Ultra HD resolution of 3840 x 2160 pixels, and it supports HDR. It supports HDR10, HLG, and the new HDR10 Plus dynamic metadata formats out of the box. So it has 4K, it supports HDR, but it doesn't actually use quantum dot technology, so it just uses a traditional color filter. The design of this TV is very stylish considering the price. Right, I didn't tell you the price. So this is the 55-inch version, and at this moment in time, the price in the UK is around £999. So it is a 55-inch screen under £1,000, which makes it very appealing for many consumers out there. And you have a big brand like Samsung, very good specifications, but we're going to go through the picture quality in a second. Let's go through the design. So for a £1,000 television, the design is actually very stylish, and you can see that the bezel is very thin, a black bezel around the screen which is very thin, and there's a classy brushed metallic silver trim. The bottom border of the screen has to be wider because this is where the LED module actually resides, and you can see that the panel actually sits on 2 feet situated at the end of the display. But as part of their design, Samsung has actually provided an alternative inner slot for these feet to actually slot in, which permits placement on a narrower AV rack. And unlike most televisions where you need a screw to actually screw the feet in, these feet can be just slotted in quite securely without needing any screws. In terms of the styling, I like it a lot. But from handling this television for a few days now, what I can say is that the back cover has a tendency to actually pop out from the screen. So you may have to actually press it back or maybe even apply a tape to keep it secure. This is similar to the situation that afflicted last year's KS7000 series. Also, the supplied power cable, I found it to be a bit short, especially if you take advantage of the cable management system and route the power cable through the provided grooves. The supplied power cable is only 1.5 meter, so I needed to use a power extension and things like that. But at least the power cable is not fixed to the television, so we can always buy a third-party external power cable, figure of 8, which is longer to permit more flexible installations in your own environment. And being a Samsung television, as we have seen over the past few years, it uses an external connections box. There are 4 HDMI ports and 2 USB ports on this external One Connect box. So the 4 HDMI inputs are all HDMI 2.0B, which means that they can support HDR and HLG, and they are all HDCP 2.2 compliant, so you shouldn't have any problem playing 4K content, let's say from a SkyQ box, let's say from any 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray player. Let's go into the picture quality then. The screen, it uses a VA type LCD panel. You can see the RGB subpixel here, and it uses a VA type LCD panel which produces relatively deep blacks by LED LCD standards. On a 4x4 ANSI checkerboard pattern, we measured a calibrated black level of around 0.05 once we aligned our peak white to 120 nits, which is our normal darkroom target. So the ANSI black level is 0.05 candela per meter square, and it is a VA panel, so understandably when viewed from the sides, the contrast and the colors would desaturate. So for the best viewing experience, I would advise you to sit directly in front of the screen. But in terms of the view angle, it is not as bad as the Hisense televisions that I've reviewed recently. This is an H-lit LED LCD which actually permits this really thin bezel, really slim design. There's only one stripe of LED module along the bottom border of the screen, as you can hopefully see from this thermal scan that I did for this television. And because one stripe has to illuminate the screen, you can't expect an effective local dimming system. I played our custom authored test pattern, which consists of a small white box crawling horizontally and then vertically against a black background on this television, and found that there are probably around 8 to 10 pseudo local dimming zones, and the zones run vertically. So let's say if you have a bright object here against a black background, then the whole zone would light up vertically, spanning the entire height of the screen. This is due to the backlight being situated just along the bottom edge of the television. Now, to Samsung's credit, they have actually designed their local dimming algorithm to combat visible haloing or blooming artifacts. So what they did was that they are relying on the native contrast of the panel to generate deep blacks rather than switching off the zones aggressively. And certainly for HDR, I am relatively happy with the performance in terms of the backlight management. But if you place some bias lighting or some ambient light in the room, then obviously the perceived blacks will become deeper and you won't notice any graying of the letterbox bars and blooming and haloing or clouding or flash lighting or things like that. By the way, our review sample in terms of the backlight uniformity, it is extremely good. I saw no clouding, no flash lighting, no corner bleeding, even in a pitch black room. And the screen uniformity generally is very good as well. When watching football, I didn't really spot any dirty screen effect or DSE. So that was the backlight and the screen. Let's move on to colors. Now the thing about Samsung's picture affecting controls on their 2017 televisions is that the local dimming cannot be switched off, so there are only the options of low, standard and high. And for calibration, you are advised to just use low. And in terms of calibration, because local dimming cannot be switched off, so the presence of the adjustment slider or the user menu may affect the reading on screen. But I managed to discover, thanks to the help of Chris Heinonen and also Mr. Tyler Pruitt of Portrait Displays, that if you actually use the Kalman software, the Kalman 2017 software, you can actually connect your laptop to this television and perform a direct display control or DDC in a similar manner to the QLEDs. So Portrait Displays has worked with Samsung to implement direct display control or auto calibration on their QLED series of televisions, but using the same controls, it actually works on this television if you have the necessary cables and the software. It actually works on the MU series as well. So I know not many people is going to go out there and hire a professional calibrator, pay them say 300 or 400 pounds to calibrate a screen that costs only 1,000 pounds. But in the event that you would like to do so, then the professional calibrator can certainly hook their kit up to the system and calibrate this TV in the same manner as they calibrate the QLEDs. Right, so using this method, I managed to achieve accurate grayscale and colors on this television. And when I watch a few of my favorite Blu-ray scenes, such as from Skyfall, the colors always look very, very natural and realistic, and I'm happy with the color presentation of this television. This is obviously only talking in SDR. Later on I'll cover the HDR and the HDR colors and the DCI-P3 color gamut. Okay, what we'll move on to is motion. Now, this is a native 120Hz panel, which is excellent at this price point because most other TVs at this price point, especially at the screen size, they only have a 60Hz panel, which means that they may present a slight telecinic judder when playing back 24 frames per second movies, or they can't achieve a higher motion resolution because their native panel refresh rate just isn't high enough. But that's certainly not the case of this 55-inch MU7000. If you look at this motion resolution test pattern, which is derived from the FPD benchmark software test this, the baseline motion resolution of this set is 300 lines because it is a sample and hold display. But if you engage Auto Motion Plus, then motion resolution can be boosted to 1080 lines. And if you use the Auto Motion Plus auto setting, it will introduce opera effect to movies and also some interpolation artifacts. But you can fine-tune it further by using the Auto Motion Plus custom submenu, which allows you to set the blur reduction and judder reduction separately. Also, on this television, because it is a native 120Hz panel, it actually provides a black frame insertion as well, or BFI, and this is engaged by switching on LED clear motion. By switching this on, what you do is to ask the TV to insert black frames in between the original video frames. This reduces the retinal persistence and improves motion clarity. But because of how BFI works, there will be visible flicker, and you may see from the camera that the light output has dropped as well. So I think BFI, I'm always a big fan of BFI, and I think Samsung's implementation is one of the best on the market because the screen itself, it has sufficient light reserve to compensate for the brightness drop, and also Samsung's BFI implementation tends to introduce less flicker than competing implementations by other brands. So it's up to you whether you can actually tolerate the flicker, but I'm a big fan of the BFI system on Samsung televisions, and this is one of the TVs that actually provide BFI because of its native 120Hz panel. So that is motion covered, and what we want to move on next is in terms of scaling and video processing. Now, upscaling wise, I used to think that Samsung's upscaling is actually fairly good, and they are probably the most forgiving of all the manufacturers. By forgiving, I mean that they introduce less ringing. They don't really look as sharp, but there's less aliasing and less ringing artifacts in terms of their scaling. But I think one thing that has actually hampered the standard definition presentation of Samsung televisions is that you can't actually disable overscan on Samsung TVs for a standard definition signal, whereas other brands such as Panasonic and Sony, they have provisions within their user menu to allow you to disable overscan. And as you can see from this SMPTE RP133 test pattern, which is in PAL or 576i, I stands for interlace, you can see that part of the picture is being cropped out, and therefore the image is being expanded on screen. And by expanding the image, you are actually scaling the image even further, causing it to become blurrier. So maybe Samsung can think about actually implementing a function to disable overscan even for standard definition content. And general video processing is very good. The video mode deinterlacing and the film mode deinterlacing are really of quite a high level. But I tested this television with some interlace broadcasts from the internal aerial TV tuner, and this 55-inch MU7000 still displayed some slight stuttering when there's a scene change. Let's say if I'm watching tennis, there's a player playing, and then once the point ended, there's usually a slow motion, and then once the slow motion has finished, it actually cuts back to the live scene, which is fast action again. Now during these scene changes between a fast sequence and a slow sequence, the TV, I think, maybe is confusing it either for video or film, and therefore is applying the wrong processing. So there's always some slight stuttering. So I saw this on tennis, and I saw this on football as well. But the higher quality the source, if you go progressive or if you go up to 4K resolution, then the instances of these processing errors actually decrease. So whether you notice this motion stutter depends on whether you are sensitive to it and whether you are feeding it low quality or high quality sources. Right, so that's the motion processing, and now let's talk about HDR. Now, it is difficult to expect good HDR from an HD television. That's just physics. You can't actually avoid it. The OLEDs, they can actually control every pixel, so they can switch every pixel on and off independently of each other. Full array local dimming LED LCD, even though they can't do that, they at least have a certain number of zones where they can actually switch it on and off independently of each other to give a higher contrast for HDR. But HD LED LCD, such as this 55-inch MU7000 from Samsung, because the LED module is actually located only along the bottom border of the screen, they can't control the light in the manner that full array local dimming or FALD LED LCD or OLED can. So understandably, HDR images, because of the high backlight demand, the images have a tendency to wash out, to give less pop, so to speak, than the FALD or the OLEDs. And especially dark scenes, because the backlight is always driven to around 20, you can see that the dark scenes can actually take on a grayer hue as well. But other than that, I think this TV does a decent job at HDR, because you can't really expect too much from HDR from an HD screen. That's all I'm saying. And if you want to actually get a good HDR experience, then you have to upgrade to, let's say, a full array local dimming LED LCD or an OLED, which will cost much more, maybe at least £2,000–3,000. So you can't really expect this TV to perform as well as those more expensive televisions in terms of HDR. But within its limitations, I think this TV actually does a decent job. So peak brightness came in at around 560 nits once we measure it on a 10% window pattern, and on a full field pattern it's actually not too bad as well. It's around 450 nits, and this is after calibration, by the way. And DCI-P3 color coverage actually came in at around 90%. It is not as high as the QLED, but then again, this doesn't have the quantum dot filter, and the quantum dot filter will add to the cost, and therefore the price of the QLED is so high. So this IP3 coverage is 90%, and the tone mapping algorithm on this television is actually fairly good, and I've respected what Samsung is trying to do with their HDR10 tone mapping algorithm. What they are always trying to do is to retain the specular highlight detail, even up to 4000 nits. So even in all the 4000 nit 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray titles, Samsung televisions, including this UE55MU7000, will retain the most bright detail. So let's say bright sun, specular highlight detail, they'll all still be present on this television. And it's actually tracking the PQ-EOTF curve, which is perceptual quantization electro-optical transfer function curve that is specified within the ST23884 standard fairly accurately as well before actually rolling off. But one side effect of actually trying to do this, I mean by trying to adhere to the EOTF curve while trying to maintain specular highlight detail, is that in certain scenes, especially in 1000 nit content, you can see more posterization or contouring artifacts on this Samsung television than competing TVs from rival brands. The color gamut DCI-P3 is not as wide as the QLED, and so the combination of the high backlight demand relative lack of local dimming and also a smaller color gamut means that the colors don't really look as explosively vibrant as those other display technologies, but at least they all still look fairly natural and realistic within reason. So that's HDR covered, and now let's move on to gaming. Samsung TVs have exhibited very low input lag over the past 2 or 3 years now, starting with the GS9000 or GS9500 series, and the tradition is continuing on this MU7000. I used a Leo tester to test this display, and in 1080p mode it is around 24 milliseconds. But once I used a HD Fury linker to upscale the 1080p signal from the Leo tester, and then inject HDR metadata as well so that it kicks into HDR mode, I found that the input lag is slightly lower at 19 milliseconds. And both of these figures are excellent figures. It makes this television one of the most responsive TVs that you can buy today for playing reflex-based games. By reflex-based games, I mean racing games, arcade games, first-person shooters. And I played Horizon Zero Dawn through HDR, through a PS4 Pro on this television, and it looks natural enough. And I think overall the impact and the realism is never going to be as good as a full array local dimming LED LCD or an OLED, but it does a decent job, especially at this price point. To summarize, I think that the Samsung UE55MU7000 is an excellent TV for its price. Now, there are a number of outlets who have complained that this TV is not good enough and it is a downgrade from the KS7000 series, which is true in a certain sense, but I think in the grand scheme of things, you need to think that the evolution from the KS7000 series is the Q7, because they are both quantum dot based, whereas this MU7000 series is probably more an evolution from the KU series, from last year's KU series, in terms of the contrast performance and the color gamut coverage. So the bottom line is this: is there actually another 55-inch television in 2017 that is as good for under £1,000? I really am struggling to think of any TV that can actually outperform this Samsung MU7000. Here's the thing, let's talk about 55-inch or smaller TVs that are below £1,000 in the UK at this moment in time. Now, the key competing televisions are the EX700. EX700, it doesn't have a 120 Hz panel, so its motion and its motion clarity and its motion smoothness won't be as good as this Samsung UE55MU7000. And let's talk about the Panasonic EX750 or EX780. Now, that TV does have 120 Hz as well, but even the 50-inch version is more expensive than £1,000, and the 58-inch version is even more expensive. Now let's consider from the point of view of LG. LG, if we take into consideration some of their televisions that are below £1,000, they're all going to be using IPS-based LCD panel. And IPS-based LCD panel, even though they have wider viewing angle, their blacks are not going to be as deep as the VA type panel that the Samsung MU7000 is using, and that will especially impact on the HDR performance as well. So that's Panasonic, that's LG. Sony, right, the closest that I can find from Sony that comes close to the performance of this Samsung MU7000 is likely the XE85 or X850E series. So that has a 120 Hz panel. If you step down to the XE83 or XE80, I believe that those are IPS based panels. And then if you step down to XE70, those are going to be using 60 Hz panel rather than the true 120 Hz panel that this TV is using. So the XE85 is the equivalent from Sony, but that costs much more as well. The 55-inch version, I believe, is probably around 100 to 200 pounds more than this UE55MU7000. Obviously, I'm just going by specifications and what I read from other outlets, because I haven't had the chance to test all these other televisions to bring it in my test room and test them. But just going by specifications and findings from other review publications that I trust, then I think you're going to struggle to find a TV that can better this Samsung MU7000, given the criteria of 55-inch 2017 television under £1,000. This has a native 120Hz screen. It has a VA panel. Its color gamut is not the widest, but it is sufficient. It is at least still 90% of DCI-P3 color gamut coverage. And its peak brightness for an HLED LED LCD is actually 560 nits after calibration. And the full screen brightness is around 400 to 450 nits. And don't forget the input lag as well. The input lag is running around 24 milliseconds, 19 milliseconds in HDR, 4K HDR mode. So I think that the UE55MU7000 is a good proposition from Samsung, which offers excellent value for money, and I think it will actually appeal to many consumers out there. If you found this video useful, please click the like button and subscribe to the HDTV Test YouTube channel if you are not already a subscriber yet. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you the next time.